is a lamp unto my feet.
If you have your Bible with you, I'd love you to open it now to 1 Kings chapter 15. We're coming near the end of the second section in the book of Kings, having to do with the divided kingdom. Our story begins here in the second generation after the split. We're looking at the descendants of Rehoboam in the kingdom of Judah and the descendants of Jeroboam in the northern kingdom of Israel. It'll take a bit to unpack, detangle, and explain these various stories, so we better get right at it. Hear now the word of the Lord, beginning at verse 1. Now, in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam began to reign over Judah. Let's just pause briefly here. I realize that it can be very difficult to keep all of these names straight. In the last chapter, we heard about a young man named Abijah, the son of Jeroboam. And we also heard about Ahijah, the prophet. And now we've got Abijam beginning to reign over Judah. That's a lot of very similar sounding names, and there will be more to come. A lot of Hebrew names end with the Yah sound because, of course, they're referencing the name of God, Yahweh. And a lot of Hebrew names start with the Ab sound because that is a reference to the word father, Abba. So Abraham means father of nations or father of many. And Abimelech means my father is king. And so that's why so many of these names sound so familiar, because many of them are starting with the Ab sound and ending with the Yah sound. And there are a lot of different ways that you can put those sounds together. This Abijam is the son of Rehoboam and thus the grandson of Solomon. His name means Yahweh is my father. So this is an absolutely classic Old Testament name. We'll jump back into the story at verse 2. He reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. That name, by the way, means my father is peace. Now, I promise I won't do that for every name as we go forward. I just want you to understand why so many of these names sound the same. However, interestingly here, many scholars think this is an alternate spelling of the name Absalom. Absalom also means my father is peace. Absalom, of course, was the son of David that started the civil war, which is ironic given that his name is my father is peace. Anyway, the son Absalom is the one we're talking about here. He's the one who killed his brother Amnon after Amnon raped his sister Tamar. Now, that Absalom had only one daughter, and her name was Tamar, named in honor of his sister. So Maacah might actually be his granddaughter. To further complicate our efforts to keep track of all these names, the same Hebrew word for son can be used for grandson, and the same Hebrew word for daughter can be used for granddaughter. So buckle up. This does get complicated. All right, but to keep it simple, it is probable, though not certain, that Rehoboam married his cousin or second cousin, Maacah. And together they had a son named Abijam. And so Abijam was the grandson of Solomon and the great-grandson of Absalom. And so here's the point. He was of the royal house of David all the way down to his toes. Verse 3, and he walked in all the sins that his father did before him, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Now, just remember that the word father can mean grandfather, or in this case, great-grandfather. It means basically descendant. Now, if you want to be really confused about this, and I'm sure you do, Abijam was the great-grandson of David and the great-great-grandson of David. If you think about that for a moment, it will come to you. Regardless, despite being doubly descended from David, Abijam was nothing like David. His heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. Verse 4, nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, setting up his son after him and establishing Jerusalem, because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Now, here we see two of the major themes in the book of Kings side by side, the theme of decline and the theme of faithfulness. Things are getting worse, even in the southern kingdom of Judah. So there's decline, even in the house and family of David. But because David was faithful, and because God is faithful to his promises to David, he keeps the line of David alive. He keeps the light on, so to speak. Things may get dim, but the light will never go out. There is always hope to be found in the house of David. Remember that, because that is one of the themes that will lead us straight to Bethlehem in the New Testament. Verse 6. Now there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. The rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? There was war between Abijam and Jeroboam, and Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. And Asa, his son, reigned in his place. Now, notice how brief the stories are now. We had 11 chapters for Solomon. Now we get 8 verses for his grandson. That's an important feature in the book of Kings. Things move faster and faster, and then all of a sudden slower and slower when there is an important theme being developed. But here we're still in one of the fast parts. We're on a roller coaster that is picking up speed. We're going downhill fast towards darkness, death, and exile. Now, while that is true overall, in the south, it is a bit more of a winding road. There are several brief respites and revivals, kind of like little hills on a roller coaster before the steep plunge at the end. We begin to read about one of those mini revivals now in verse 9. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa began to reign over Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done. All right, the first thing we have to figure out here is how Asa and Abijam are related. Verse 8 says that Asa was the son of Abijam, but verse 9 says that they had the same mother. That's confusing. Of course, there are 2 options for understanding that. One is that Abijam had an incestuous relationship with his mother, and the other, thankfully, more likely option is that Abijam's mother raised Abijam's son Asa, presumably after Asa's mother died in childbirth. Whew, just even saying that is confusing. Just remember that the same word can be used for mother and grandmother, because 2 kings in a row have the same mother. How can that be, right? It's wildly complicated. In all likelihood, we are to understand Asa as having been raised by his grandmother after his birth mother died. And somehow, despite having a bad man for a father and a bad grandmother for a mother, which we're going to see in just a moment, somehow, in the mercy and providence of God, Asa turned out pretty well. Verse 12. He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. He also removed Maacah, his mother, from being queen mother because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. And Asa cut down her image and burned it at the brook Kidron. But the high places were not taken away. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was wholly true to the Lord all his days. And he brought into the house of the Lord the sacred gifts of his father and his own sacred gifts, silver and gold and vessels. Asa is the first of the reformer kings in Judah. The decline of northern Israel is unrelenting. There are no reformer kings in the north, but there are several reformer kings in the south. And as I said, Asa is the first of those. Now, as we'll see when we encounter each of those reformer kings are typically measured in terms of how far they go to eradicate idolatry from the land. On that score, Asa gets a B. He gets rid of the male cult prostitutes. That's good. He removes the idols that his fathers had made. That's good. He also makes the hugely bold play of removing his grandmother as queen mother. By the way, side note, I love the Hebrew word for queen mother. It is actually Gebura, which literally means big lady. I just think that's fantastic. But regardless, removing the woman who raised you as queen mother, deposing her from her position, takes some moral and spiritual fortitude. But as king, it was something that Asa had to do. His grandmother was sponsoring pagan worship. And so Asa had to take action. He cut down her image and he burned it at the brook Kidron. That's a public statement, and it is one that I am sure cost him at home. But here's why Asa doesn't get an A. He did not go out into the countryside and tear down the high places. Asa was content with executing reform in the capital city. In Asa's mind, as long as Jerusalem was free of idols, as long as the temple was free of idols, as long as the official church, we might say, was free of idols, he didn't really care a great deal what the common people were doing out in the country. That was their business, or so he thought. In general, in the book of Kings, to get an A from the author, you need to take things further than that. You need to go on a campaign to rid the entire nation of idolatry. And only 2 kings went all out and did that. Hezekiah and Josiah. We'll read about them later. They're the only ones who get an A. But still, a B is pretty good, particularly after 2 terrible kings like Rehoboam and Abijam. On the whole, Asa made things better in Judah as opposed to making them worse. He wasn't perfect, but he did arrest the decline in significant ways, and that matters. He also brought the worship offerings into the temple. In general, pay attention to the furnishings in the temple because they serve almost like warning flags at the beach. When there is gold in the temple, that's a good day for swimming. But when the gold is leaving the temple and being replaced with lesser things, that's a red flag. That's a riptide warning. That's when things are about to get swept out to sea. Verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and gave them into the hands of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tabrimam, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, who lived in Damascus, saying, Let there be a covenant between me and you, as there was between my father and your father. Behold, I am sending to you a present of silver and gold. Go break your covenant with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may withdraw from me. And Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel and conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel-Beth-Maachah, and all Kinneroth, with all the land of Naphtali. And when Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah, and he lived in Tirzah. Then King Asa made a proclamation to all Judah, none was exempt, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and its timber with which Baasha had been building, and with them King Asa built Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. Now the rest of all the acts of Asa, all his might and all that he did, and the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? But in his old age he was diseased in his feet. And Asa slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father, and Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his place. All right, here we get a little bit of implied criticism against Asa. When he was threatened by Baasha, the king of Israel in the north, instead of relying on the Lord to deliver Judah, and instead of charging out to face the foe in the name of Yahweh like David would have done, Asa empties the temple of its silver and gold in order to bribe Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria. In essence, he gets the enemy of his enemy to do his fighting for him. He gets Ben-Hadad to invade Israel from the north, drawing Baasha away. And then Asa takes all the stones that had been used to build Ramah, and he takes them and builds defensive outposts all along the border. In other words, he used bribery and strategic statecraft to protect Judah instead of trusting in the Lord. Now you might say, well, that's just good leadership. If you can avoid war and bloodshed, then you should, even if that means stripping the temple down to the studs. But that is a very 21st century North American perspective. The Bible doesn't see things that way. In 2 Chronicles 16, 17 to 10, we get some additional content on this incident. It says, at that time, Hanani the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you relied on the king of Syria and did not rely on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Syria has escaped you. Were not the Ethiopians and the Libyans a huge army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, he gave them into your hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward him. You have done foolishly in this. From now on, you will have wars. Then Asa was angry with the seer and put him in the stocks in prison, for he was in a rage with him because of this. And Asa inflicted cruelties upon some of the people at that time. Two things to note here. First of all, we mustn't forget that the covenant community in general, and the house of David in particular, was supposed to be the sword of the Lord to execute judgment on the earth. They were supposed to fight the battles that needed to be fought and to execute judgment where it needed to be executed. But bribing people and hiring foreign armies served to obscure that. And also, that war that Syria fought against northern Israel resulted in significant chunks being bitten off of northern Israel that were not recovered. And so Asa's strategy ended up costing the covenant community land, even though it saved him land, his portion of the covenant community, in the short term. And so the verdict of the Bible is that this was ultimately short-sighted and unfaithful. It was a mistake. It was a blemish on Asa's record. And that takes us to the second interesting thing that we should note here, which is that generally good people often react very poorly to negative feedback. You see, being good often makes you proud. So proud that if anyone ever dares to correct you or rebuke you, you fly off the handle. That's what Asa does here. He has a temper tantrum, and he abuses the prophet who delivered God's rebuke to him, and he abused some of the people. That's not good. Asa lashed out at other people, and apparently he even lashed out at God, or at least he tried to give God the cold shoulder. 2 Chronicles 16, 12 to 13 says, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians. And Asa slept with his fathers, dying in the 41st year of his reign. So how do we feel about all this? Asa was a good king. He was a good man. But like all good men and all good women, Asa had feet of clay. And we should see that. As someone once said, the Bible is not the story of good guys and bad guys. It is the story of bad guys that need Jesus, and bad girls that need Jesus, I'm sure we could add as well. There's only one perfect son of David in the Bible, and it is not Asa. It is Jesus. And so every other son of David prior to him is going to have flaws and shortcomings. But on the whole, Asa was a good king. He was a reformer king, and he did a bunch of things that needed to get done. Verse 25, Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel 2 years. Now let's just pause for a second to note the scene change. This is part of what makes the book of Kings confusing to the first-time reader. We were just reading about King Asa in the south. Now all of a sudden the scene has shifted to the north. We're talking about a different king in a different place. Get used to that. The narrator is telling two parallel stories, and so there will be a lot of back and forth. We're up north now, watching the rapid decline of the kingdom of Israel. One of the things you will notice is that in the north, there are no reformer kings, and so the story is more depressing and more violent. The reigns of the kings in the north are typically much shorter than in the south. Over the next 2 chapters, for example, we will hear about 2 kings in the south and 6 kings in the north. And that's pretty representative. The reigns of the northern kings are short, and they generally end in bloodshed and massacre. And so it will be here. Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, is a chip off the old block. He is an apostate and an idolater, and things are not going to end well for him. Verse 26. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin, which he made Israel to sin. Baasha, the son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha struck him down at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines, for Nadab and all Israel were laying siege to Gibbethon. So Baasha killed him in the 3rd year of Asa king of Judah, and reigned in his place. And as soon as he was king, he killed all the house of Jeroboam. He left to the house of Jeroboam not one that breathed, until he had destroyed it, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite. It was for the sins of Jeroboam that he sinned, and that he made Israel to sin, and because of the anger to which he provoked the Lord, the God of Israel. Let's just pause here. I want you to notice that there will be frequent dynastic changes in the north. There is no single ruling family as there is in the south. In the south, in the kingdom of Judah, all the kings will come from the line of David. But in the north, it is one dynasty after another. This isn't a son rising up to kill his father and taking over early. This is a dynastic change. There is no stability and a great deal of chaos in the north. And we're supposed to be drawing certain conclusions from that. When you throw off the authority that God has ordained for you, things tend to go from bad to worse. Verse 31. Now the rest of the acts of Nadab and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. In the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah, and he reigned 24 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of Jeroboam and in his sin, which he made Israel to sin. Now, we've already met Baasha earlier in the chapter when we were hearing about Asa's misguided attempts at statecraft. Remember, the story arcs are different lengths in the south and in the north, and so this kind of stitching and recapitulating will be necessary in order to keep these stories running roughly parallel. As I said, there will be 6 king stories told in the north alongside of just 2 king stories in the south. The decline is happening even faster in the north because there is no true worship and there are no reformer kings. As such, they are racing hell-bent to the bottom, with nothing standing between them and destruction but time, and increasingly less of that. The story in the north is all about warning, whereas the story in the house of David in the south has warning combined with hope. Thanks be to God. And thank you, friends, for listening to another episode of Into the Word. If you'd like to support the Into the Word ministry so that we can continue to make this material available free of charge, just visit the Into the Word website at intotheword.ca and click the Give tab. You can also access our entire library of Bible teaching on the website, or you can download the Into the Word app by visiting the App Store or Google Play. We have episodes and series covering whole books of the Bible in both the Old and New Testaments. We encourage you to take a look and to join us for another episode of Into the Word as we continue our journey together through the whole counsel of God. We'll see you then.
Your word is a lamp unto my feet